Well, I just wanted to quickly thank everyone for coming this evening. My name is Benjamin Rybeck. I am the general manager of House of Books in Kent, Connecticut, and it is a great pleasure tonight to present André Aciman talking about his latest collection of essays, Homo Irrealis, in conversation with another acclaimed author, David Nasaw, author most recently of The Last Million. I'm also, as always, extraordinarily grateful to present this event and many events like this with our partners in crime right down the street, the Kent Memorial Library. I think that having them here in this town is such a great benefit to Kent and this area of Connecticut. So it's always so wonderful to present these events. Before I turn things over to Brittany, the director of programming at the library, I want to first mention that we will have a chance after the event for a Q&A with André. So as you're watching this event and as you have, as questions occur to you, please go ahead and place them in the chat function or the Q&A function down below. My apologies. So place them in the Q&A function. And I also want to mention that if at any point this evening you have a tech issue that you need to have resolved, please go ahead and just shoot a quick message to House of Books right here on Zoom. Amanda Myers is our tech wizard, has been for so many of these events. She is behind the scenes and she will address your concern promptly. So please remember to do that. I also do want to say that signed and even personalized copies of Homo Irrealis will be available for anybody who would like to buy one. We've made it easy to buy one. You can just go to houseofbooksct.com/Aciman, and you can go ahead and check out there. If you want a personalization, go ahead and write it in the instructions field. We'll be getting them all signed, and we will reach out to you as soon as yours is ready to pick up, or if you want us to ship it, just put that right in the instructions and we'll take care of it. So once again, I just want to thank everyone for coming. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So happy to be doing this in partnership with the Kent Memorial Library. So without further ado, I want to thank you, Brittany McAllister, and look forward to this event. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you, House of Books. Really thrilled with all of the programming that we get to do with you guys. As Ben mentioned, my name is Brittany McAllister. I'm the Director of Adult Programming and Special Events at the Kent Memorial Library. And we have a lot of wonderful things coming up this season. KentMemorialLibrary.org if you want to check out our calendar. And you can always shoot us a message as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce tonight's speakers because they're some literary luminaries that we're just really lucky to have with us this evening. André Aciman is the New York Times bestselling author of Call Me by Your Name, Out of Egypt, 8 White Nights, False Papers, Alibis, Harvard Square, Enigma Variations, and Find Me. He is the editor of the Proust Project and teaches comparative literature at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He lives with his wife in Manhattan, and Homo Irrealis is his latest book. And in conversation with André, David Nasaw is the author, most recently, like Ben said, of The Last Million. His previous books include The Patriarch, selected by the New York Times as one of the 10 best books of the year and a 2013 Pulitzer Prize finalist in biography. Andrew Carnegie, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, the recipient of the New York Historical Society's American History Book Prize, and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And The Chief, which was awarded the Bancroft Prize for History and the J. Anthony Lucas Book Prize for Nonfiction. He is a past president of the Society of American Historians, and up until 2019, he served as the Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. Professor of History at the CUNY Graduate Center. So welcome, André and David. Thank you.
Delighted to be with you.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, Andre's a dear old friend, but because of COVID, we haven't had a real chance to discuss his latest book. So I thank you all for giving me the opportunity to have that conversation now, live on Zoom. with an audience. Andre, you are, I've never asked you this question. I've never quite figured it out. Out of Egypt comes out in 1995. And then 5 years later, False Papers, another book of memoir, essays. You have your own style, and I don't know what to call it. But the best word is probably essays. And then in 2004, there's the Proust Project. And 12 years after you publish Out of Egypt, we get Call Me By Your Name. And then 3 years after that, a second novel, 8 White Nights. Then there's another book of essays. Then there are 3 novels. Then there's another book of essays, the latest one, Homo Irrealis. So how does this happen? Were you always a storyteller? Do you have somewhere hidden away short stories you wrote when you were 11 and a novel that you wrote when you were 18 and never saw or hasn't yet seen the light of day?
I hope it never does, put it this way. I've told my sons that when I go, they can do anything they want with my papers. They can burn them, they can publish them, whatever. But frankly, I've always been writing. I think since I was 9 years old, I was always writing something. And it never occurred to me that anybody might want to publish me until I was past 40 years old. Then I said, maybe I should just give it a try and see what happens. And it's been that way since Out of Egypt was published. I was, I didn't know if I was an essayist, a memoir writer, a novelist. I still don't know, because they all seem to sort of slip into each other in ways that I find completely unpredictable, and I can't even chart the course.
Was there a novel that you had written before Out of Egypt or right after Out of Egypt?
No, there was one that I had written when I was, I don't know what that is. I wrote one when I was 20 years old, and it was finished, and it was a terrible thing, and I never touched it again, never even looked at it. But that was the last time that I wrote anything. Then I stopped writing altogether because I did many other things, among them, as you know, graduate school, which is going to drive anybody to dementia and dry his blood out, and it did, until I decided to go back to writing.
And when you decided to go back to writing, while you were writing these essays that were published in these first 2 books, I keep harping on this. Were there short stories somewhere? Were there ideas for short stories? Were you shy or nervous? Why this 12-year gap between Out of Egypt and Call Me By Your Name?
I don't know. I mean, I also had to write a book for academic reasons, which I wrote, which took a while to write. But I did many other things, many essays, many speeches, many talks. I was very busy, and I didn't think that I had a novel in me. I wasn't going to do a novel until one day I published a short story, and somebody said to me, "Why don't you make a novel out of it?" And it was 8 White Nights. And I said, "You sure?" And said, "Yes, absolutely." So I basically went with what others say. I always go with what others say. I don't have much self-confidence as a writer.
Do you write now in the present, now that you've published in all these different genres, memoir, essay, literary criticism, novel, and a wonderful audible novella, I guess we would call it. Do you write in all these genres at the same time? Or do you finish an essay and then go back to your novel and then go back to the essay? How does it happen?
No, it's just that you have to do, sometimes you have to do a preface, a book review, and if you're writing a novel or a novella at the same time. You do them all at the same time. And usually what happens, and you probably know this, you do the same thing, is that as you're doing one thing, you kind of resent the other one for standing in the way and getting in the way. And then you find yourself resenting the other one that you thought you favored. And so you're constantly disloyal, moving from one thing to the other. And I think I think the life of a writer is, as a friend of mine used to say, you're a writer, you're a writer. You'll do anything that involves words. And I like that attitude. In other words, you're not a novelist, you're not an essayist, you're not this, you're not that. You're just a writer. You'll do all genres.
Yeah.
You should be able to do that.
Did this book and these essays, have they been sort of on the back burner for a long time? The particular notion about the Homo Irrealis, has that been a preoccupation or an occupation or somewhere in the back of your head for a while before it came out in print?
Yes, it has. I mean, a couple of the essays had appeared about 8 years ago and were published. But I think that once I realized that I was onto something, the irrealis dimension in all of us, then I decided I'm going to focus on it, and I cannot write about it vis-a-vis myself. It has to be about other people and how each different author, artist, philosopher, whatever you want to call it, psychologist, how each one of them has addressed this subject. Sometimes, as I think I've made a point of saying many times, unbeknownst to themselves. In other words, they don't know they're dealing with the irrealis mood. I see it and I allege it on them. I put it on their shoulders as if, because it is a natural outcome of their work as I see it.
Did the conceptualization come before you had the language, Irrealis?
No, I used the word irrealis in an essay that I published in a book called Alibis, which is about 10 years ago. I used it there. I was already interested in this because I was interested in, this dimension that I think has always perplexed me, is the might have been, the would be, the might still be. That dimension has basically caught my own experience, not only as a human being, but as a person who has had to abandon many things in his own past, I was kicked out of Egypt. That has never left me. I've been sort of trundling my life with Egypt on my back, as it were. And so there's a dimension of the past that's with me, but also I realized that in the past, I was also constantly looking forward to an imaginary future. So I don't know which dimension is the actual one that I live with. I live with all of them.
Yeah. For a historian, it's particularly, how can I put it, difficult and enlightening, and a bit frightening to read this book. I mean, as when I began my courses with undergraduates, I always used a dreadful metaphor, but it was the best I could do. And I would say that we live on a river of time, and we float in our various vessels, kayaks, rowboats, yachts, on this river of time. And we have to attempt to steer in one direction or another on this journey. We don't quite know where we're going, and we can't write about the journey until we get to the end, but we never get to the end.
Right.
So it's always, that writing is always provisional. And we're writing about the past, the river that we've been on, without being able to see it, or feel it, or smell it, or hear it. But nonetheless, as a historian, there is a past that configures a present, and the present is someday going to be a past that's going to configure a future which is going to become our present. Mm-hmm. But there are distinctions that we as historians deal with. What is extraordinary about Homo Irrealis. And I'm approaching it rather than just ask you to tell us what it means. I want you to talk about how you explode that notion of three dimensions of a past, which is past, which lets into a present.
Well, let's begin with this one, is that you're writing and you're teaching about time. And I've come to the point where I'm saying that time doesn't care what we think of time. Time may not even exist if you think of it that way. We have ways of measuring time, but that's our invention. That's our little foible. We need to know what time it is, what year we're in. But time doesn't care. Time doesn't happen that way, if it happens at all. In fact, we are not even in the present. That's one of the things that I always maintain. Everybody wants to be in the here and now. They tell you, I live in the present tense. I'm not in the past tense. I'm not in the future. But in fact, most of us spend, I don't know what percentage of our time thinking of the future, of what our fantasies are, our past fantasies, the ones that we never realized in the past and that continue to reverberate on us. In other words, the past things that we never did now have acquired their own memory. And so they haunt us just as much as the things that we did. And so we have this whole dimension of the past, the things we might have done that we never did and regret never doing. Those are there with us. They're still with us every day. And then comes the future, the things we wish to see happen, the things we fantasize about. And think of the number of hours that this adds up in a day. The things that basically hover all around us. And so I have come to the point that most of our times are spent in the might have been, in the could have been, the should have been, all these things. And so time in the present tense hardly ever exists. As I like to say, when it's 12 o'clock, the sun is right above your head and you have no shadow because it's right on top of you. And that is, in fact, the only instance of the present where there is no shadow. Otherwise, there's always a shadow.
You talk about on page 202 and 203 in this essay, Swan's Kiss.
Uh-huh.
You say Swan wishes to overtake the present, to acknowledge moments in the past, ellipses, all the while wishing to defer this present by seeing it as a moment that will all too soon vanish into a remembered past. And then on the next page, you talk about Wordsworth, for whom there was a future, then the future became a past, but there was no present. And yet, in your novels, there is very much a present. There is very much, the novels are suffused by people, by wonderful characters, maybe with the exception of 8 White Nights. But the novels are suffused with the immediacy of the present, the being of the present. They're in the present in a way that you say, Proust will not do or does not do.
Right. The novels, by the way, they're always written with a retrospective glance. That happens. I mean, it's there in Call Me by Your Name, and at the very end of Find Me, you have a moment in which people who are happy to meet again say, I wish your father was alive here. He would have been happy here. In other words, there's always that glance that skids away from the present and goes somewhere else. If you think about it, in Call Me by Your Name, which I assume is the novel that you're alleging, it's think of it, the first 2 chapters, which is more than 100 pages, more than half the book, is devoted to a young man fantasizing about what he fears will never happen.
Right.
That's
But-
where his mind is. But of course, at some point it does happen. And when it does happen, it doesn't happen in the present. It happens a few hours later as he recalls what happened the night before. There's always that step back or that step forward. There's a very unsteady foothold in reality.
What about Harvard Square and the Enigma variations? Harvard Square is present centered, is it not?
It is up to a point, but you have to realize that the friendship between the 2 men is based on the fact that both wanted to be in France.
Okay.
They meet in a bar every night, they drink together, and then they separate. But as they're in the bar and the lights are mostly dimmed, they think they're in France. They're happy to be in this imaginary France. Harvard, Cambridge, Massachusetts is momentarily put on hold. They don't want to be there. In fact, they don't even like the US, as one of the characters will say. So yes, they're in the present, they're riveted in this society called Harvard, but at the same time, they're both of them are drifting back. Both of them come from North Africa, and each one eventually sort of skids back to North Africa at the end of the day.
And the in Find Me, the love story between the father and is it Miranda? What is
Yeah, Miranda, yeah.
That feels to me that it's taking place
In the present.
in the present.
It is in the present. That is an exception. There is absolutely, he says to her, the only thing that's not in the present, he says, why don't you come and stay with me at the beach where I live? You're welcome to live with me. I don't care for how long you come, but just come. And she says, yes, fine. And that's the end of that. I mean, it's totally in the present. And I that is not exactly my comfort zone. The present tense is not exactly something that I feel totally beholden to.
That's an extraordinary story.
Well,
That part of the book.
yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that it's not as if you say that for Proust there is no present, but in your novels,
Yeah.
there is a loaded present. There is a present that carries within it that embodies longings from the past and for a future. And I think that's what makes them the novels so radiant, because they're moving in two directions. The present is as I said, loaded, and it works brilliantly.
Okay. I'm happy that you feel this way. I mean, and I would like to believe that too.
But you're not you're not going to go back. You say that the love story in Find Me is an exception.
It is very much, I think it is an exception.
You're not going to go back and do that again. Or I mean, that's an impossible.
You don't know. I don't know. I've just finished another one, and it's coming out sometime, I think, in September. And it's about 2 people who are very much in the present.
Yeah.
They don't have much of a future because they're old. So, but they're very much in the present, and they accept that. On the other hand, it's not exactly the place where I find myself writing automatically. I like to drift into an imaginary past. If you look at Out of Egypt, it's all about the upcoming exile that's going to happen. The fact that these people are leading very present lives, very comfortable present lives. They know that their days are numbered and that they will lose it. They just know it, and they live it every single day that way. And I try to suggest that back at the beginning of Homo Irrealis, when I speak about the fact that here we are in the present, very happy, more or less, but we know that this is going to go away and we will lose it, and we will even have nostalgia for it.
Yeah.
And so we rehearse the nostalgia before we've even exiled.
Yeah, I love that part. Talk just a little bit more about how nostalgia is created. Um, it's not a looking back at a past, it's imagining. Well, you say it. You say it better than I.
Well, it's basically, these are people whose days are numbered in Egypt because they're Jewish, or they're foreigners, or they've been living in Egypt all their lives, and they know that they will be kicked out. They're not deciding to leave, they're being kicked out, which is what happened to my family. So eventually, as you're looking out of the window, you're saying, I'm going to lose this. And one of the things that I realize is that you're not saying I'm going to lose this, but you're already saying, when I'm going to be in Paris, I will have to remember myself in Egypt, looking forward to the day when I won't be in Egypt any longer and will be in Paris. So being in Paris is already kind of twofold moment in time. In other words, it's the anticipated Paris, and it's the being in Paris, looking back at the Egypt that you lost. And that kind of back and forth move, which I will liken eventually to how you make a souffle. It's the folding of the froth of the egg white. You constantly fold it into itself, to the point where you have no idea how many times you folded it, but you folded it. And that's how these people, or at least these individuals, or me, just experience time as a kind of perpetual folding of the past into the future, into the present, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I love talk about your comparison with did you move from Julia Child and her souffle to Beethoven? You know,
Well,
it works in print.
Well, I hope it does. It worked for me when I was thinking it. It comes from that sentence that I've written, the sort of the might have been that never happened, but could still be, though you wish it may not happen, but not just yet, because you also anticipate it's happening. That kind of sentence, when you write it down as one sentence, is really already a kind of folded over. And that's how the idea of the folding of the souffle came to me initially, because of the way that sentence was written. It can actually, as you know, that sentence can be written in perpetuity. Okay, it's like one of those sentences that doesn't need to have an end, because you can constantly fold it on itself. And so I was thinking of Beethoven's, particularly that probably the best piece of music ever composed, which is the Song of Thanksgiving in the A minor quartet. It's a moment that he could have continued writing it until today. It doesn't have to end. It can go on forever. And Beethoven knew that. He knew that he hates endings. He likes to just sort of fake you into thinking, okay, this is the end of the sonata. This is the end of the symphony. You know this better than I do because you're a musician, okay? And suddenly you say, okay, it's coming to a close. No, it's not.
Wonderful.
He found another reason to keep going.
Yeah.
And
In the ninth, when you think it's coming to the close, and suddenly the band marches through. I mean, it's extraordinary.
right.
But you talk about the Proustian sentence in the same way.
I do. And I also mentioned this about Joyce, because when you come to what I think is the best thing that Joyce, I mean, people will disagree with me, but I think that The Dead is probably one of the best things ever written in the English language as a novella, a short story, whatever you want to call it. It's at the very end, he just describes a snowfall, and it goes on for 4 pages. Now, my theory is that he had absolutely and this is my theory, I could be totally wrong. He had no idea that it was how to end this story. And he decided, I better throw a snowstorm here and see what happens. And then he got carried away by the snowstorm. And the snowstorm could be going on for 20, 30 pages. It doesn't have to stop at 4 pages. But he basically got into this riff and he couldn't end it. And thank God he never did. Because it's the most beautiful thing that I've ever read in English. And I knew it when I read the story the first time when I was 14 years or 15 years old. I said, this is the best thing I've ever read. And I haven't changed my mind. So maybe I've never grown up. Who knows?
Let's talk about Rome.
Uh-huh.
There are some remarkable essays about Rome and your particular love for it. On page 39, you say, Rome, the eternal landfall. I'm sorry, Rome, the eternal landfill.
Yes.
Nothing more than a hodgepodge of constantly reshuffled and refolded tenses. Mostly the past tense, marginally the present, and heavily the conditional and subjunctive moods. Why is Rome so important to you as a writer?
Well, I think it was important to Freud because in Civilization and Its Discontents, he has a very famous analogy of the psyche being like Rome. Basically, the psyche is built on its own ruins. In other words, there are ancient ruins underneath, below the more modern ruins. It's all a series of ruins. And those plates, if you want to call them that, are constantly being reshuffled so that the ancient plate comes to the surface, the new one goes underneath. And Rome is, in fact, for Freud, it was basically the best metaphor for the city. It's everything about it is layered as the psyche is. But of course, Freud got carried away, and then he said, okay, I've been carried away, I better stop, because basically you cannot have two buildings containing the same stones in the same place. He figured that out, okay? Because Rome is built with stones taken from one place, moved to another place, and with which they build something else, which falls into ruins as well.
Right.
So Freud was aware of that, and he used that as a metaphor for this Rome. And I think that if you look at my own life, it's been exactly like that. It's all pieces, hodgepodge of stones that have been moved and reshuffled, and there is no chronology to our lives when you look at it.
But there is also no, I mean, what's remarkable about the essays on Rome, especially in Freud's Shadow Part 2, is you make it really clear that there is no, you're not writing about Rome, you're writing about your Rome.
Yes.
And your Rome is, how can I put it? It's the Rome, but it's very much your Rome. It's not, it's your perception. It's what you bring to Rome, what you take away from it, what you're nostalgic for when you're not there, what you long for. It's a remarkable series of passages, but it also makes it clear that the artist, and we're all artists in some way, the artist creates a reality, and that reality is personal, it's inescapable, and it will not go away.
No, it shouldn't go away because you brought yourself to it. In another essay on Rome that I wrote many years ago, essentially the Rome that I'm interested is a totally personal Rome, a Rome that I loitered through, going from one bookshop to another bookshop. That was really my itinerary in Rome, is just going from bookshop to bookshop, buying a book every week in order to hide with the book from the city that at the time I didn't quite like. This is the other thing. Rome is not my home. It's my adopted home, and I had a hard time adapting to it. But basically, the description of Rome that I give is a feeling for Rome. And what I loved about this is that every time that somebody reads this particular Rome of mine, they say, this is exactly how I feel about Rome. And so I'm saying to myself, this is very weird. My Rome happens to be a very strange Rome, and yet everybody reacts to it as if it were theirs. So I must have contaminated them in one way or another with my Rome. And I think that is what a writer does, is you force people to see the city that you are describing through your eyes. And I always like the example of Matisse giving us in Nice. You can never see Nice again. You see Matisse in Nice, and you never see, you know, Monet's cathedral. You never see the Cathedral of Rouen. You see the cathedral that Monet painted. You're always seeing things through the artists. And of course, you can never see Dublin in snow without thinking of Joyce. That's it. That's a fact of life. So authors alter reality for you, and that's why we want authors. That's why we ask for composers to basically alter something about our lives forever. And I would like to think that my Rome, especially the Rome in Homo Irrealis, is in fact one that changes people, that makes them aware that even our sexuality is far more complicated than we think it is.
Yeah. But you know, your essays on artworks, on Sloane, on Monet, on the films that you talk about, the Romer, even on the poem you see over and over again in the subway.
Oh,
You have a particular slant on that, seen from the perspective of an Homo Irrealis. Talk about that.
well, I've decided when I wrote the book that I was going to write a series of essays on different writers, different composers, different movie directors, and every single one of them, I realized, makes no sense unless I bring this person right to the border of the irrealist mood, that moment when they themselves may not be aware that they're actually writing about something that may never be again and might never have happened in the past, which is why I like the example of, I mean, the Sloane thing is perfect because Sloane is painting a subway L on 6th Avenue. And in the drawings that he made before painting it, he paints a 6th Avenue that has absolutely no subway because he didn't want the L to intrude on his vision of the street. But basically what he was doing was going back to a time when there was no L. And then, of course, he must have known that the L was going to be taken down at some point. And so he was painting it with an eye, not just towards the past, but towards the future when the L was no longer going to be there. Of course, as far as we know, when we see the L, it's a moment frozen in time. It's very much in the present. I think it's 1922. And he's there, he's capturing on the canvas. But he must have known that this was because they were already talking of taking it down. In fact, they took it down, and the apocryphal story is that they took the metal from the L and sold it to Japan, not knowing that they were going to build planes to attack us at Pearl Harbor with them, which is an amazing sort of little anecdote, but I don't know if it's true or not.
Doesn't matter, you've made it true. Ed Doctorow, when asked about certain incidents in his novels, did so-and-so ever meet so-and-so? And Ed would say, well, they have now.
Yeah.
You say on page 21, Monet and Hopper weren't seeing the world as it was. They were seeing other than what lay before them, experiencing not what was given, but what always felt elusive and strangely withheld and needed to be invented or restored, imagined or remembered. And then you say, just after that, art is the huge negative, the everlasting yet, or call it the inability to take things as they are.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I totally agree with this. It's basically, it may start as a form of distrust of what is there, distrust also of what everybody thinks and believes, because an artist is always contrarian by nature. I think you have to be contrarian. Otherwise, you basically repeating what everybody else is saying and believes, which is easy. But they are also, like Hopper is seeing in New York, that is entirely his. If you see any person drawing a Hopper design, you'll say you're being like Hopper because it's so recognizable. The Hopper designs of, especially of Manhattan, you can recognize them in a second. But that city does not necessarily exist. He's created it. He's captured the vacuity that exists in Manhattan on a Sunday morning as nobody else has and nobody will. But you can walk in the street and say, my God, doesn't this look like a Hopper moment?
Yeah.
In other words, that's what movies do. That's what paintings do. They give you a reality that is not there.
As you develop this notion of the Irrealis, did that deepen your understanding of these artworks? Did it change it? Or were you simply putting into words something that was already, that you already knew?
Well, you know this as well as I do, that writing itself sort of magnifies what you've always believed. And it puts it in the most stringent way. In other words, it takes what you've always thought and believed and maybe even taught and argued verbally. But when you write it down, it acquires its own life, its own coherence that it never had when you were thinking about it. So when I say what I say about art ultimately being bold enough to distort what we see, that is a product of the act of writing. It's not just a thought that I had. And I think that that's why writers like to write, because they take what are sort of what you might call fluttering ideas and they rivet them into language.
Well, writing is thinking.
It is thinking, absolutely. It's the best kind of thinking, I think, because it's more coherent, it's more rigorous.
I loved, and maybe this will be the last topic we talk about, your disquisition on the word almost. I, you know, had this been something that was simmering somewhere? Had this been part of a speech or a talk? Do you use this? Had you used this when you?
No, I just, at some point I said, why did I use the word almost twice in a sentence? Why am I sort of holding back saying something directly and frontally? Why is this almost? What am I doing? And just the fact of wondering that question made me want to write something about almost, because I realized at that point that I'm always using the word almost. And if not almost, then I use the word perhaps. These are all sort of softeners, mollifiers that allow you to say something without being held to it, because you might want to withdraw it and recant whatever you've said, and you don't want to be held to it. So that kind of attitude vis-a-vis language made me write this essay. Actually, I was invited by a person I met in a gym who said, are you so-and-so? I said, yes, I am. And she said, I want you to write something for us. I said, she was working at the Times at the time. She said, do you have any essay? I said, no, but I'm going to think of one. And I was thinking about almost, so I went home and I wrote down the essay on almost and sent it to her, thinking, of course, she's going to think it's totally ridiculous. They published it. And I think it got a lot of positive feedback. So I was happy with that.
It's a wonderful essay. On page 224 at the bottom, you say, there is not a page I write where the word almost doesn't slip in to mollify and mitigate anything I say. It is my way of undoing what I write, of casting doubt on anything I write, of remaining uncertain, untethered, unmoored, unaligned, because I have no boundaries. Sometimes I think I am all shadow. And then you end this essay with, and perhaps It's a new paragraph. And perhaps I almost don't know what the word almost really means. The perfect ending. Are there, I think we're going to go now to questions, and they will be moderated and asked by Brittany.
Thank you both so much. This is so great. So yes, I've gotten a couple of questions so far, but don't forget to add your questions to the Q&A device up below on your screen. So our first question is, are there any other places, artists, writers, etc., that you've thought about writing in this collection but never got to for whatever reason?
Yes, there has to be. I mean, the idea of the Irrealis mood is universal and is boundless. But I haven't. At some point, I decided that's enough. You've made your point, and I didn't want to go on. But it's there. I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, when you think of the art of the fugue, or the Goldberg variations, or so on. I mean, these that can go on forever.
Yeah, if I can only interrupt for a minute, I continually wondered why there was no fugue in here when you talked about music. I mean, the fugue seemed the perfect counterpoint to the endless Proustian sentence, to Joyce's, and the fugue is based on never wanting to end.
That's right.
Holding on itself over and over and over again.
Well, when you think of the art of the fugue, I mean, what's the canonical answer? It's the art of the fugue by Bach, is that the last four notes are B, A, C, H. In other words, allegedly Bach died as he was finishing the art of the fugue, which is basically unfinished. Which is a meaningful end to an unfinishable work.
Yeah. But Beethoven's Joseph fugue is just remarkable.
I think it's
remarkable.
The greatest fugue ever composed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a magnificent work which should not end.
What does fugue mean?
It means an escape.
It means escape. Yeah.
It's running away from you. You know, that's what a fugue is.
Okay, back to the questions.
Like a fugue state. Do you imagine somebody writing an essay like this about your own work?
They're welcome to it. Yeah, they could. It would easily. I mean, if they're writing about my work, they would easily find that it's all about the Irrealis mood. Everything is so basically either equivocal or it is fundamentally unfinished. And there are many times in my work where, in many places, I have said, so and so, or even I have lived the wrong life. This whole life that I've lived may have been the wrong one. There must have been another one, the more perfect version of my life, which has not happened yet. And I used to call that the Bellagio moment, because there was a moment when I was invited to stay in Bellagio, and I was looking over across from the Lake of Como to the actual Bellagio. I was across from Como, and I was looking over at the lights of Bellagio, and I'm saying to myself, this is where I should have gone, not where I am, because Bellagio is a beautiful little spot on Lake Como, and that is where the perfect life is. But nobody lives a perfect life. So we always have this idea of the perfect life, and we long for it sometimes, but we know that we wouldn't even want it if it came to us, which takes us back to Proust, who always says that as soon as something is definitely going to be mine, I don't want it anymore.
So what is your advice to those who, how do we get ourselves out of that mindset, aside from reading? And
you don't want to get, it's not a disease. It's actually, it's a form of plenitude that basically allows you to see that in your ability to fantasize, that's not a minus, it's a plus. Living in the present is a big, big minus. Because who lives in the present? When you're having a wonderful dinner with friends, and I've had wonderful friends, David, one of them, where we have wonderful dinners. I try not to say, I'm going to remember this dinner a week from now, but I'm enjoying myself right now. But I also know that I'm kind of saving a spot in the future for that time when I will long for that time that we had dinner together in order to plan for the subsequent dinner. It's a plus, it's not a minus.
I like that. Someone asked, once you've written about another work of art, are you worried about that particular piece framing or influencing your next piece, or do you welcome it?
I welcome it because the good thing about me, it's probably the best thing about me, is that I may change my mind entirely 24 hours after writing something. I'm not fastened to what I write. I know that at the moment when I wrote it, it made sense. But in a year from that moment, I may change my mind entirely. And in that respect, I'm very much like Montaigne, who kept sort of editing his essays to bring them up to date and finally realizing, wait a minute, I can't do that. I have to leave it as it is, but I need to add this to it because I've had a subsequent thought which might contradict it. So I'm all for that. I think that we are sort of totally in motion. We're never stopping. There's one way to stop, of course, and we don't want to confront that issue yet.
Any more questions? Feel free to type into the Q&A or the chat if that's easier. Any other questions? David, did you have any other questions?
Thousands, but
Oh, I just got another one.
we will figure this out.
Do you think that those who have experienced trauma are more likely to live in the present during a trauma and following a trauma appreciate the present more? Do you need me to read that again?
No, I understand it. I totally understand it. I mean, people who have been in a trauma have essentially have had the past eradicated. It's kind of obliterated. They don't want to go there. So the past is a moment that's very painful. Even the things in the past that were nice have become sort of defined by the trauma. So they are basically damaged. Their memory banks are damaged and frozen. They don't want to go there. So they can only go into the future. They probably are rooted in the present. In fact, that's one of the things that many exiles, and of course I've met thousands of exiles in my life, people who will say, I live in the present. I don't want to remember. I don't have time to remember. I don't want to go back. But it also means that you're not going to go forward either. You're just going to be rooted in the present, and you're going to make, a lot of them have succeeded in their lives, some of them have even made fortunes precisely because they have no other escape into the past. They have to be in the present. And that's a solid way to be, but I don't know how to be that way, and I wouldn't want to. But trauma is one of those things that alters your whole perception of everything. And I wouldn't say that I'm not traumatized by what happened to me, but in a sense, it wasn't that drastic or that radical that it damaged me in such a, but it has given me a way of sort of, as I like to say, of sort of swaying into the past and into the future, because there's no root. That's the one thing that you forget to say, is that, when you're in exile, you don't really have roots. You have new roots, but they're not solid enough, and you know that they can go away. And so you're constantly shifting. And that's one of the things that I've had to live with. Oh, on that note, okay.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. And just a reminder, as Ben mentioned, Andre has been so generous to sign copies of the book. So if you want to purchase a copy, you can head over to the House of Books website and let them know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Thank you really so much. This was an act of friendship. I have to pay you back in some way. Thank you again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brittany. And thank you, Ben. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, everybody. Yes. And Amanda, too, even though. All right.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.